The last keynote did not exactly have everything a lot of people are expecting, with rumors still piling up about the new iPads, this new budget MacBook that could be coming out. In the back of our minds, we're all like, so that 2019 Mac Pro, that's happening soon, right? So in today's video, I was hoping we could highlight all of the things we're anticipating to see in a potential keynote next month, hopefully. So let's get into it. I think that if Apple is going to have a second keynote in 2018, which so far they have not completely ruled out. You know, last year a lot of people thought there would be a keynote after the iPhone keynote, and Apple officially declared, nah, we're kind of done. That was all the event coverage we needed for this year. And since they haven't said no yet, there's a lot of people speculating that since all these rumors are piling up for still 2018 releases, Apple could be having a late October to early November keynote that is more oriented around the Pro market and more about people who are interested in iPads, interested in Mac, and making that even more accessible, just like the iPhone XR is trying to make the iPhone X more accessible and controversial, which Apple never seems to be in short supply of. So the one thing I think that would be the header of this new keynote would be the new iPad Pro. We've seen these concepts for a long time now, the idea that the iPad is going to be catching up with the iPhone X design with those curved corners, no home button, no fingerprint reader, and now just Face ID. Hopefully, some of the software code we saw in some recent iOS 12 beta code is true in that Face ID will work in landscape mode. They just had to stretch out the sensors a little bit further and put them in places that they aren't on an iPhone X in order to make landscape mode work, but luckily things are looking up for the new iPad. There's also software to suggest that Apple could be switching the iPad to USB-C as they try to orient it as more of a pro device for professionals and want to show how it can work well with the MacBooks, connect to external displays, use USB-C accessories, and so on and so forth. So adding USB-C I think would be a great idea. Really hope that's true, but we still have to wonder why Apple hasn't adopted it on the iPhones yet. We can speculate, but I think it's safe to say Apple may see the iPad going in a different direction, at least for the Pro market, when it comes to iPads than they do iPhones. The other bit of good news that I'm a little bit excited about is a new budget MacBook. Some are calling this the MacBook Air refresh. I'm personally hoping it's kind of a whole MacBook lineup change up where they call this thing the MacBook, they call the 12-inch MacBook the MacBook Air, and then we just all go home because the lineup makes sense. Because right now it doesn't. Why is the lightest MacBook called MacBook and why is the thickest MacBook called MacBook Air? I don't understand it, but hopefully at this next keynote they could fix all that. And this new budget MacBook, and what we mean by budget is probably like $1,000, because Apple definitely when it comes to laptops will never go too cheap, but when both your super portable MacBook and super powerful MacBook start in the $1,200 to $1,300 price range plus more depending on your country, it makes sense that you should probably make a MacBook that has lower end but average looking specs and also not too big a priority on making it as thin as possible, because a lot of people always say the 12-inch MacBook has terrible specs, but we know that's not what you're paying for. The reason the 12-inch MacBook is priced where it is because of its portability, the fact that they were able to shrink an entire computer into that much space and then make the rest of it a battery, not to mention the years of support you'll be getting with Mac OS and that optimized software that results in very low-end hardware being able to run perfect 4K video editing and Final Cut just fine because of that optimization. That's what you're paying for with the 12-inch MacBook. So this budget MacBook, which is trying to be reaching more people, I think, as long as they're not too keen on making it thin and not too keen about putting the best specs in the world in it, as long as they include 8th generation Intel cores that are more low end but decent enough and optimized with that software, it could be an overall perfect laptop for a lot of college students or business people out there who just need something basic and more affordable. And it's rumored to come with a Touch ID sensor but no touch bar, which would be a first and definitely a direct response to Apple's criticisms over the MacBook Pro. People like the biometric login, but they don't care for the touch bar. They see it as a gimmick and they see it as $300 extra for this giant OLED panel. So there's plenty of people out there that would love to have Touch ID but not the touch bar, so I can understand why this budget MacBook may have a market, and hopefully it'll be unveiled before the holidays. Next up is kind of a smaller market that Apple rarely caters to, but the Mac Mini. Staff at Apple have continuously said that the Mac Mini is an important part of the Mac lineup, but obviously not too important because they haven't updated it in a long time, but it's in dire need of a refresh. It needs some Thunderbolt 3 ports, it needs some spec bumps to the latest version of Intel CPUs and GPU. Price would likely be a bit higher than it is right now, but for the people out there who want a powerful Mac but don't need the 5K display attached to it in this all-in-one design, both the budget MacBook and the Mac Mini could make macOS much more possible for a lot of people out there who can't afford to spend thousands of dollars on these ultra high resolution 5K displays, because some of us frankly just don't need that. They just want a Mac that works. People are on the road a lot, but they want the best specs and they don't need a MacBook. So I could easily see how this keynote is going to be about bringing more pro-end hardware running macOS to more people. Then also, like I said, I would love to see a sneak peek at the 2019 Mac Pro. Apple definitely confirmed that this tower-based Mac would not be available until 2019, but we're getting pretty close, so I feel like this would be a proper keynote to tease it and show people what it'll be capable of. Don't release all the information yet, sorta like what Apple did with the iMac Pro at WWDC. They teased it, they showed off what it'd be capable of, but it gave us plenty of time to save for it because it was incredibly expensive, and also hype it up when the release actually came out that December. This year, you could tease it in December, and then at WWDC in 2019, actually unveil the pricing and all this specs that you can configure it to, and I imagine it should be cheaper than an iMac Pro because you could be able to configure it with the higher end CPU and GPUs that you get with the Pro, but not have to include the speakers, the 5K display, that all-in-one design. You could be a bit more flexible with how you want to customize your Mac, and hopefully at the same time that means that Apple can re-enter the external monitor game and make their own 5K Thunderbolt 3 display, now that they'll be shipping not one, but two tower-based Macintoshes, both the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro, and say, this is the perfect display, you can partner with them. And hopefully they can make a Thunderbolt 3 display with very, very thin bezels, because they've been working really hard on shrinking bezels on watches and phones and now iPads. I think it's time they tackle the iMac bezels because they're pretty big. I don't really have a need for the budget MacBook, so when that comes out, I don't really think I'll get it, but we could have a use for a more affordable yet easily mobile Mac that isn't necessarily a MacBook. So if the updated Mac Mini comes out, we may end up getting it. And I could also see myself ordering the Apple Thunderbolt 3 display if that ends up happening, because that just sounds awesome. That Apple would finally sell the 5K separately and you don't have to buy a whole iMac with it. It'll probably cost a lot, you should anticipate that, but it'll probably look really good. So definitely all that last stuff with the Mac Pro is wishful thinking. I'm hoping for it, but there's definitely no evidence to suggest that a release is imminent. I'm just hoping that if this is a pro-oriented keynote where we can focus on new hardware and how the Mac is going to be more accessible to more people, that would be a proper time to tease the new Mac Pro. So what are you guys hoping to see at this next keynote? Let me know down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.